Really? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good evening from Africa and from South Sudan to everyone who is listening live to the South Sudan Women Intellectual Forum. Welcome to today's session, and we are glad that we have very great panelists today with us. And today is also a day that, even if it has passed, we are marking the International Human Rights Day, and we are still recalling the 16 days of activism. And as you know, 16 days of activism is not only the 16 day, it has to be in our daily lives as South Sudanese women, and who are working also for access to justice to women, and also working for respect to rights of women of South Sudan, and also advocating for rights of girls, boys, and children in South Sudan. So South Sudanese women and girls have been in the history for struggle for human rights alongside the men. Much as we were struggling for our rights and liberty from Sudan, South Sudanese women are also still struggling to have their rights realized. And it took us long that South Sudanese are now speaking about rights of women and girls. But yet, these rights are not achieved, and majority of the South Sudanese women do not even have access to justice, and most of them are abused, and there's impunity that goes with it. So in today's forum, we are going to look at the different ways of how we can address the issues of access to justice to women, girls, and boys, but also look at what has been done by the South Sudanese women themselves in addressing the challenges of access to justice and fighting impunity in our society, where South Sudanese women, we realize like they are equal before the law, and that the law is treating them equal with men, where they are having their rights guaranteed, both at the legislative level, but also at the justice institutions and the law enforcement agencies. So today we are blessed to have with us a strong panel of South Sudanese women. This panel is comprising of women lawyers and also social workers and activists who have been engaged in the struggle for access to justice to South Sudanese women, boys, and girls. And we are blessed to have among us, if I can introduce them, we have Josephine Chandiru, who is the executive director of a South Sudanese local women's organization, Steward Women. Josephine is a graduate of law from Makerere University and had been instrumental in the fight for access to justice to women. She is one of the strong pillars of South Sudanese women who was able to take a case of sexual and gender-based violence to court, and the first of its kind to be won in Eastern Equatoria, dropped by the court. So Josephine also won the African Fellowship for Human Rights. She is our greatest asset that we found. And Josephine, you are welcome to today's forum.
Thank you.
Lawyer, Christina Pitalo Kudu. Christina is a law graduate, and she had been practicing with Lomoro and what the law says if we are talking about access to justice, if we are talking about guaranteeing rights of women in our different laws, including our constitution. So we are blessed that we have Christina Peter today with us. Christina, you are welcome to today's panel.
Thank you so much.
Okay. We are also blessed to have our sister who is far joining us from Jamaica, and she is none other than Kiden Logo Jones. She's one of our strongest women's activists. She's a social worker and a graduate of Makerere University. She worked a lot in the humanitarian section. She worked with the UN agencies, and she worked with local organizations, and she had been a pillar in the struggle for access to justice for women. And in Jamaica, she's still working on issues that are close to her. She's working with women in prison and working on access to justice. And we are going to be learning from her as South Sudanese on how access to justice at the global level and where she is has been um, um, one of the things that we can learn from, especially for those in South Sudan who are working on access to justice to women inmates and female prisoners. Kiden, you are welcome to today's panel. Kiden, are you? Okay. Okay, we are also having with us Julia Onyoti Odigo. Julia is a graduate of law from East African KIU University, and she's also a graduate from Tanzania, where she did her degree in arbitration and mediation. She worked as a human rights lawyer and activist, where she also engaged in issues of access to justice by participating in mobile courts. She did a lot of documentation on human rights issues, and she had been providing pro bono legal services to women and girls in the South Sudan court, following up on issues of SGBV closely. So Julia, you are welcome. Okay. I think Julia has challenges probably joining. And we receive apologies from Julia Akur from FIDA South Sudan. She may not be able to join us, but I trust in the ability of our panelists today, who are going to be covering most of the topics that we have. And we will start with Josephine Chandiru. Probably our questions will go to you. If you can share with us a little bit about the work that Steward Women is doing in regards to sexual and gender-based violence during the COVID-19, and also your work around the mobile courts. We understand, like you yourself, you had been spearheading the mobile courts, and particularly for access to justice to women. So we'll also be grateful to hear from you about your experiences, what type of cases you are handling with the mobile courts, and which are the cases that came alongside with COVID-19 that are creating a lot of violence for women and girls in South Sudan. Josephine, back to you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and good evening, fellow panelists. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, listeners. This is Josephine speaking. I work with Steward Women as a director. Steward Women is a women organization established in 2009, and our main focus is access to justice for women and girls. Since our establishment, we have supported 102 women with legal representation. Out of the 102 cases, 26 are rape. Steward Women is also an organization that has established 4 legal aid clinics in Nimule, in Juba, in Bentiu, and then in Capoeira. We are a member of the, we are the chair of the Rule of Law cluster, Rule of Law Technical Reference Group of the GBV subcluster, and then we have observer status with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So the work that we do is surrounded around legal representation, legal advice, legal education and legal counseling for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. If I can refer you to the Transitional Constitution under Article 20, that this is regarding the right to litigation. It is guaranteed for all persons, and no person shall be denied the right to resort to courts of law to redress grievances. And I think this is the backdrop where we get our autonomy to do the work that we are doing. Regarding the documentation of cases during the COVID-19, South Sudan registered its first case of COVID-19 in April. And so beginning from April up to date, there have really been increased cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And in particular, partner intimate violence were reported during this pandemic. If you look at Juba alone, maybe with the other parts of the country, rape, including gang rapes, were on the increase, together with the intimate partner reports. So a recent example of violence against women were just on Tuesday, where a disabled man in Eastern Equatoria killed his wife, and then after 2 days, a soldier also punched his wife to death. And these are cases of domestic violence which dialogue, but they end up arbitrarily taking lives of women. So by the time in Juba, I take us back, by the time the 3 children were murdered in Rock City, this was a time where a day could not pass without hearing on a case of sexual and gender-based violence. It was really at the peak, and it was like every state in South Sudan was becoming a hotspot for gender-based violence. And this was primarily caused by the COVID-19, because survivors were locked down with their abusers in the same place. So my experience during the COVID-19 with working on the mobile court regarding cases of SGPV is that Steward Women was able to hold 2 mobile courts, one in Nimule and one in Capoeira, and this mobile court was able to prosecute 31 GBV cases. 31 cases. Out of the 31, 20 were SGBV cases, and out of the 20 SGBV cases, 13 were rape cases, critically showing that out of 20, if 13 cases are sexual and gender-based violence cases, then women have really suffered from sexual violence during this period. Again, my experience of working with the mobile court is that the mobile court has been very, very expensive, especially during this COVID-19, where flights were restricted, and yet the High Court judge for Nimule or Capoeira has to come from Torit. So by experience or by practice, what we had to do was to get some security from the SSPDF to accompany the High Court judge from Torit to Nimule and also to Capoeira, where he was able to handle the 31 cases. And then when the suspects are sentenced, the convicts have to be transferred back to Torit. Again, we need to hire a vehicle and then hire more SSPDF to transport these convicts to Torit maximum prison, since Nimule and Capoeira do not have those kinds of prisons. So there is really need for collaboration with other partners when it comes to mobile court. And I want to say it here, the issue of victims advocate versus lawyers, I mean defense lawyers. If you are alone and as an organization and you're Steward Women, your focus is access to justice for women and girls, and yet you're not having defense counsel, it becomes very, very hard. But if we are to collaborate with other partners who will take the side of the defense, and why we so much concentrate on the issue of the victims is because we know we need to follow up with their case. We need to take them through what is going to happen in the court. We need to follow up with their files in the police. And especially in Juba during this time, we had to spend a lot of money and time running after the police and following up with their cases, which if it was left in the hands of the prosecutors, then less survivors would be receiving access to justice. So we decide to just be a guide to the survivors beside the public prosecutors and ensure that the prosecutors do the work that they are doing. Jacqueline, maybe I should stop here and give room for others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Josephine Chandiru. What Steward Women is doing, and I think the number of cases which are mostly rape, and I think 13 rape cases is a lot for us and in one location. And we have had like many different locations have rape cases reported. And I think the current report by the UN says like 6,000 rape cases have been reported. And I believe also in our hospital here in Juba, where we
Okay, I think Jacqueline, maybe the internet cracked with her and
sorry,
it's
the
weak.
internet is weak.
Oh, she's back.
So I'm saying that that is a lot, and in Juba alone, we have a lot of cases being reported at Juba Hospital. From the information we are getting that about 4 to 5 cases in a week are reported of SGBV, and at least most of them are rape cases. So I'll come to you, Christina Pitia Lokudu. As someone who is working with the legislature and you have worked with the Ministry of Justice and also worked as a private advocate. I would like you probably to tell our listeners and to share with us in this discussion what legal framework exists that protect women against sexual and gender-based violence. We have had cases where people say like customary law, and some people talk about the conflicting interpretation of the different laws. So if you can take us through the legal framework for the protection of women against sexual violence, and particularly also focusing more on the rape cases and how to deal with rape in South Sudan.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for the chance. I'm Christina Peter, and I'm a lawyer by profession. And good morning and good afternoon, good evening to our listeners. Maybe to touch more on what Josephine said and to address some of these issues. In South Sudan, we have some laws that are not favorable to female or women. And in the system, I think we need a lot of reforms, mostly in our laws. And because we may find some of sections in the penal code and then the criminal procedures that are not favorable to women, such as adultery and then rape and marriage sex or rape. And we will find that the laws are not helping because it takes us back to the cultures and norms and traditions. And it's mentioned clearly in the law that if there is dispute in this issue, it will be taken to the customs and traditions of the tribe of that person, which with the cultures, we'll find that culture mostly put women in the second position. So it's like men-dominated society. So I think the Constitution gave us rights to be respected. Like the Constitution gave women that rights, that their individual rights or group rights, it has to be respected by everybody in the society, and then the government should also respect that, and the implementation or protection of these rights should be through judiciary, and the Human Rights Commission should monitor that. So, and again, the Constitution went further in Article 16, and it gave women rights on certain things, but it's not compulsory, like completed to cover most of the rights that we were fighting for, like the issues of rape. It's not mentioned clearly because the Constitution normally it just gives points, and the acts will explain a little bit, and then the regulation will explain the details. So the Constitution mentioned that there must be equal rights between the two sexes, and but then and it has to be respected. But we don't see that in practice. Like someone like me, a lawyer, if I enter the courtroom, people may not respect me because I'm a woman, and I have to work hard. I have to fight, and then show people that we need to fight for our rights. And also the peace agreement. The peace agreement also touched something on how can we fight these harmful cultures and traditions through enactment of laws that can ban these harmful cultures, as well as the Constitution. Also, there's this element mentioned there. So at the moment, we are so happy that there's this document that anti-sexual and gender-based violence, which is still a bill, but hopefully it will be enacted into an act, and we will need a lot of work to be done, because for us, some of women, they're not active enough, they don't participate that much, they don't fight for their rights. And also we find in the peace agreement, it's also mentioned parameters of the permanent constitution that it has to cover human rights elements and the rule of law and the concept of constitutionalism, where the government is bound by the law. And then it also has to cover equality and non-discrimination. And I think affirmative action, and we noticed that there's gradual change in that element specifically. And recently I've seen in one of the newspapers that one of the parties has implemented 40% of female participation in the political, like participation in the government. So I think we are moving away from that part, and hopefully by the enactment of the law, things will change. So mostly we need reforms in our laws and in the systems, and a lot needs to be done. And also the police sector and the judiciary, the number of the judges there are not enough. Sometimes you run for the same case for almost six months. And at the end of the day, we may not find solutions. And the only judge will be the one judge will be the one handling many cases. And like what my colleague Jacqueline Josephine just said, like judges are not enough. This is only in the city. Leave about the states, the other parts of the country. So I think it's a big challenge. We need to work hard on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And I think the law needs to be reformed. This is what Christine is saying, starting with our constitution and other laws. I believe it includes the penal code. Josephine, do you have something to add in terms of the legal gaps? I know like steward women had challenges of interpretation of the law, particularly looking at the marriageable age as one of the article that is promoting, I could say, like early and forced marriages and rape in our society, because people are forced to marry against their consent and against their will. And it's that provision of the constitution that is allowing for that. And also we have seen that there are other legal instruments that probably protect the rights of women, but South Sudan is yet to ratify them. So do you want to add on the legal framework and probably have some analysis of where the gaps are?
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline, and also Christina, who spoke after me. One of the legal gap I see is in the case of the lack of the family law in South Sudan, law related to marriage, divorce, and then succession to property. I want to give an example. For example, if the family law was enacted and the Marriage Act was enforced, then the marriageable age would be clearly stipulated in the Marriage Act. Currently, in partner, intimate partner violence or domestic violence, women cannot petition for divorce because it is not stated anywhere the grounds of divorce. So the women are just living in abusive marriages and relationships because we do not have the law on divorce. And then moving to the succession to property, we find that the in-laws are taking all the properties from women. Women cannot be able to control any of the properties, even if it is left by her deceased husband. So there is really a big gap in regarding to cases that are related to women and girls in South Sudan, and family law would really, really pave a way, because we are now just relying on the constitution, and there's not so much precedence that we can bring out of there. And then also for the lawyers in the court, when we cite cases, the judges are not using cases as precedents to resolve issues. They just rely on statutory law. So this is seen clearly when they give their judgments. Judgments are just 2 lines. So there is also the reluctancy in the implementation of the available laws by the judiciary. There has been, I think, regarding the issue of the family law, it is something that is done on purpose. It is intentional that they do not want to pass it, because even just debating it alone is not taking place. And then much of the priority or focus has been on the implementation of peace process. But the violence against women is not on hold, so it should also be part of the priority. And the only commitment of the government that we shall see is when they pass these laws that protect women and girls. And then secondly, the issue of the Maputo Protocol, the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Since 2012, we've been campaigning for the ratification of this protocol. It was until 16th October 2017 when Parliament passed it. Since then, the President has not put his signature on this document. And yet, after the signature, it needed to be deposited to the African Union Legal Affairs Department, where we can then make judges cite some of the provisions, particularly related to the marriageable age, because Section 6 talks about the age of marriage for a woman shall be 18 years. So these are some of the gaps that we are still struggling with. Of course, my colleague Christina talked about the anti-GBV bill, which is still under review with the Ministry of Justice, but also would like to add my voice to the one of Christina that there's a lot of work for us to do in terms of lobbying the decision makers to really commit in paper and not just by word to protection of women and girls in South Sudan. Yeah.
Thank you, Josephine. I think one of the things that I can take from your presentation is that there is already biasness when it comes to access to justice to women. And the judiciary seems to be also reluctant in terms of making sure like women are protected and they are able to be protected under the law and also in the execution of the judicial judgments. I think this is one of the challenges where sometimes even women are sent back to the customary courts, and women feel in the customary courts there are no fairness to them. And I'll come now to Kiden Logo Jones to probably take us through some of the ways in which we can mainstream gender in the justice system, and also how can we, I could say, eradicate or eliminate some of the biasness created by customary practices, norms, and probably some of the things that come from our society, stereotypes that look at women who are sexually abused or women who suffer gender-based violence like it's their own making, you know. Sometimes we hear from traditional leaders and even from section of our society, you know, pointing at girls who are dressed badly, like they're inviting for the rape. And sometimes a woman who is brought before the traditional leaders, they will say like she's very stubborn, she has to be disciplined. So how can we ensure like we mainstream gender in the justice execution and that women are able to access justice regardless of the customary practices and norms? Ms. Kiden, can you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Hello, Kiden, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Jacqueline. And greetings. Hear me? Yes. Greetings to my fellow panelists and greetings to our wider audience. Before I could answer your question, I would like to give an overview of what the probation aftercare office is all about. So basically, the probation aftercare services is an arm of the department that deals with the rehabilitation of offenders. These are offenders who have been put on what we call the non-custodial sentences. The non-custodial sentences is basically sentences that the person will not go to prison. They have been sentenced by the judge, but they will be serving their sentences in the community. Some of the examples of the non-custodial sentences include the community service order, there's the probation order, there's the suspended sentence order, and then there's the voluntary supervision. Basically, the probation aftercare services work under two ministries. That is the Ministry of National Security, and we also work under the Ministry of Justice. Our roles is between the prison and also the courts. So basically, it is a very vital service in access and the protection of not only women, but the wider society. So coming back to your question, Jacqueline.
Yes, go ahead.
Coming back to your question. Yes, coming back to your question. Access to justice and protection of women has always been inhibited by the gender inequality in our societies. Here in Jamaica, we have made a big stride in the empowerment of women, but yet we still have instances where women have been biased by the law. So it is very vital that gender is mainstreamed into the existing structures and procedures in the justice and the protection departments. I'm going to example, for instance, during the protection, when somebody has been charged and they are in custody, that's where it starts. Like the women, there has to be some form of gender-specific needs, even during the incarceration. They are supposed to be attended by women officers. Simple things like search. When they are to be searched, it is duly important that are searched by women themselves. There's also There are also some instances where women who are in custody may have children. This has to be put into consideration. We need to be able to liaise with other agencies like the child agency to see, for instance, if the woman who has been charged does not have an immediate family that can take care of the child, how do we go about it? Is there any agency that can take the child and provide the child protection while the mother is undergoing the process of the justice system? And then we find that my fellow panelists have given an overview of what is happening in South Sudan now with the gender-based violence, which has kind of heightened because of the COVID. It is not something that is just happening in South Sudan. Even here in Jamaica, we have seen a rise where there's gender-based violence, domestic conflict, because of the fact persons have been locked down. So family members tend to spend more time with one another, and there's stress, there's agitation, so sometimes persons tend to act out. The question is that how do we ease that in our justice system? When, for instance, such matters go to court, if it is like a domestic dispute, husband and wife, sometimes we don't have to strictly follow the justice system and see that the matters are taken for trial and then the persons are tried and things like that. We need to be cognizant of the fact that these are family members. So as much as we have to provide justice for what happened, especially the complainant, we need to understand that reconciliation is very vital. So here in the Jamaican courts, we tend to make use of other alternatives that can see that these matters are settled out of court. And usually this is something that the probation aftercare officer tends to champion. We have instances where the court might request for counseling or mediation. So this gives the opportunity of the parties to solve the matter out of court. And one thing that I like about this
Kiden logo?
Yes.
Hello, Kiden. Yeah. Sorry for cutting you short, but I'll also be very keen to hear from you how it's possible to mediate probably cases where there is sexual violence and rape, and probably how is it possible also that the accused, probably if it is the husband and the wife, if they fought and probably the wife got injured or she reported this case to the police, what are the challenges that women face in regards to settling these cases out of court? Has it played to their interest? Do women feel like settlement out of the court is helping them to get justice?
Not necessarily. Usually in such matters, we realize that justice is compromised. One of the challenges that we have is with themselves. We realize that they go and report the matters, and when the investigations have started, it's the same women, the complainants, the victims, who go and withdraw the matter for the court. So even if there's evidence of physical injury, battering, but if the complainant is not ready to proceed with the matter, the court has no choice. They have to dispose of the matter. Then another challenge that I also speak about is that there is some form of coercion. The male perpetrators, they sometimes intimidate, sometimes use force, and just the same thing. As much as most women in Jamaica, they have attained some level of empowerment, we realize that if we look at things like access to land, property, and decision making, even in politics and in some of the aspects of the society that is very instrumental in empowering somebody, they are still dominated by men. So we realize that women still are governed by fear, and sometimes even if they want to assist, even if they to take somebody to court, they may not have the resources to, for instance, hire a lawyer, or sometimes the plain truth is that they still depend on the men to provide for their welfare. So basically now they are in a situation whereby they look at their rights and their needs. Sometimes it's not only their needs, but even the needs of their children. So we realize that justice at the end of the day will be compromised.
Okay. Thank you, Kiden Logo, for this great sharing of the experience of the Jamaican women. And I think some of the things are cross-cutting. Women all over the world, they undergo almost the same experiences in different ways. And I believe also in South Sudan, our women sometimes when they report these cases, they tend to withdraw because they know like the breadwinner, if he's in jail, and then they are not likely to bring food on the table for their family and for their children. And hence they just ask voluntarily to withdraw when actually they are still going to the same suffering. So poverty is also a determining factor for women's access to justice. So I would like to come to you, Josephine, given your experience with the mobile court and taking us through like how many cases were heard and what judgments are given. I would like you to probably briefly tell us about the different judgments that are given during the mobile court, because we have had scenarios where different judges give different sentencing, but moreover for the same offense of maybe say rape or sometimes assault or sexual abuse. So you find some judges giving maybe 1 year, other judges giving 5 years, others are giving 14 years, and in the same case. So, and you find that some victims, they don't feel like, the judgment is fair on their side. So probably if you can share your experience of the mobile court to see, are the women happy that the mobile court is bringing justice close to them and they are getting just compensation?
Thank you, Jacqueline, and my colleagues at the panel. Just to take us 1 minute a bit, we need to note that access to justice for women and girls, and maybe access to justice generally in South Sudan, is the least service provided to survivors. It accounts for 1% of the services provided to survivors, besides the health, psychosocial support, and livelihoods. These three are seen to be life-saving, while access to justice is not considered to be life-saving service. So if we are coming as a people from that angle that access to justice is not a life-saving service, we are bound to just be rotating in the circle and not hitting the nail on the top. So what I'm actually trying to say is provision of access to justice for survivors is very important because it is a preventive measure to deter future crime. With the handling of cases in court and whether the sentences that are given or the compensation is adequate. I said before that there is so much reluctancy by the courts in handling SGBV cases. You find that when a case reaches court, it will be referred to a chief, it will be referred to family, and when it reaches at that level, then the customary practices will take course, and then for rape cases, the perpetrator will have to marry the survivor or the victim. And then in terms of compensation, I've seen two things. One is you are being awarded compensation, and yet how are you going to execute that that award that the court has given to you? So important is to say that the role of the victim's advocate to ensure that compensation that is awarded to a survivor is followed up, and that the victim actually receives it. In many cases where the victims are just represented by the public prosecutors, they end up not following up with their awards or with their compensation. And also, when the compensation is given minimal, there is no appeal, there is no follow-up, because they are doing a government service. And then also, in these judicial courts that are handling cases, customary lenses are being used to award compensation or to award judgments, which is not evaluated according to the damage suffered by the survivor. A recent case example is the mobile court martial case that I attended. It was out of Juba. It was a court martial case where a soldier murdered a 6 months pregnant old woman. So the case was first brought before the chiefs, and the chiefs awarded 70 cows, 25 for the woman and 50 for the man. So the case was brought again before the court martial. During the giving of the judgment, the court martial judges upheld the decision of the customary court. And I was seated there and I was wondering, have you become an appeal court for traditional chiefs, or you are supposed to revise this file, or you are supposed to do a retrial in this case? From an informal point of view, I had a conversation with them, but they are saying that they made the husband to the deceased to be the complainant instead of the state. So they asked the husband, are you here to bring up a new case, or you are here to follow up with your execution? So he says he's here to follow up with the execution, and he just needs the 70 cows. And you can imagine right-thinking people who have studied law. So what kind of access to justice is this, which is being provided for women? And then the issue of the less punishment being awarded for convicts. This is something that, Jacqueline, you talked about. I've witnessed it myself. In rape cases, the punishment that is being given to the accused persons can go as low as 6 months. We are aware that Section 247 says that the punishment should not exceed 14 years. But if you look at the gap between 14 years and 6 months, really, what kind of discretion is this being applied? Is it just an issue that this is a woman and she will sort out herself, or what? So I think there is something which is really going on, and we need to do work around it. And then lastly, the issue of a safe house. Maybe I will bring this one up when I'm talking about the challenges. Thank you. Jacqueline.
Thank you, Josephine, for bringing the critical issues of compensation up, particularly where the victim, who is the woman, has no say in the way the court process goes. Mostly it's the family or the husband who decides what is to be given. And we have seen this also in case of children who are victims of sexual abuse, where the parents, instead of pursuing the case as a criminal case, they go for the compensation, which is in terms of either bride price, dubbed as compensation, and then they end up in marrying off the girl, or sometimes they just ask for cows or for money, and then the case dies there and then. There is a question from Sabina Lokolong, who is following up the discussion. She's saying that under our transitional constitution, Article 20, which was talking about that women shall not be discriminated against on the basis of social, marital status, religious, color, or nationality. And this article was removed without public knowledge or without the knowledge of Parliament. And she's asking that a lot has to be done in terms of campaigning so that this article is brought back. And I'll also say that the discussions around the Nationality Act was really a hot debate, whereby some of the men were saying that women do not have the right to give nationality to their partner or to their children. It took women long to fight for that provision in the Nationality Act for women to be given equal status when it comes to giving nationality. So what do you have to say in regards to this provision? And I think Christina talked about reforming the law and probably calling for bringing back of Article 20 on the non-discrimination of women based on nationality and social status become one of the advocacy points. And how can we advocate for that jointly, given that you have called for all actors to be working together and networking? Josephine, you can take this up, or Christine, you can take this up.
Christine, can you go ahead?
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to say, there is this Constitution Review Commission, and they're working on the permanent constitution. And after they finish with the review, I think they will share with the public, and then to maybe the parliament, and then people may, normally before the passing of the law, it goes through 4 readings. And during that time, people may get chance to pick on these issues, because the public at the moment, they don't know which articles have been removed and which ones remain there. Recently, we were in the workshop of women advocates, and they were tackling issues of basic principles of a permanent constitution. And we were asked if there's someone from Constitution Review Commission to come and answer most of the questions. Because for us as lawyers, we fail to understand some of these elements. Like this issue, I believe women-led organizations have to fight for it. And the good thing is that if the anti-section or bill be covered there, because the bill mostly it repeals some of these articles and sections within the laws, and it seeks to fight for women's rights. And it mentions, like what Josephine said, some of these articles they're working like supporting the cultures, and I'm sure by the passing of the act, it will prevail over other articles of other laws. So I hope I answered the question, and maybe if Josephine wants to add something.
Let me just add. She was talking about Article 20 of the, I think this is interim constitution of South Sudan, which is talking about the discrimination against women on the basis of marital, religious, color, and nationality. I must say that for South Sudan, CEDAW has been ratified. And I think when we begin to follow up issues related to discrimination, we can ably cite the provisions of the CEDAW. And those partners who have been keenly working on with CEDAW as a document can also bring a case in court following the violation of the provisions of CEDAW. So this is something that I wanted to add. And then the issue of nationality. I remember in 2018, mothers were not allowed to travel with their babies because they were seen as stealing babies belonging to their husbands. But single men are allowed to travel with their babies without necessarily asking for where the mother of the child is. But when you reach the airport, the father of the child will be asked. I personally was asked at the airport where the father of my child was. So we took on this as a campaign strategy during 16 days of activism. In 2018, we brought in the immigration officials to explain to us the legal provisions related to us not moving with our children outside. And from the conversation, all they could tell us with all the laws that we cited during that conversation was they receive orders from above that women should not travel with their babies. So, but then since that time, we've not been able to receive cases of where women are obstructed to travel with their babies. I was also able to travel with my baby after that conversation with the immigration officers. So like our sister who raised this issue has said that there is really need for us to engage. And it is good when we engage the direct authorities. If we have a backup of the law, we will also ask them. And if we are on the wrong, there's where we can always strike a balance between the two. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Josephine. I think also we talked a lot about the judicial systems, and we talk about the customary courts, and we have seen like there are gaps in the way that they are dispensing justice to women and girls. And recently there is the sexual and gender-based violence, which they call actually gender-based violence. The word sexual is removed. I don't know if they are just feeling like it's no longer sexual, but from our conversation, we have seen that most of the gender-based violence includes sexual violence. So this court is launched just on the 30th of this month by the Judiciary of South Sudan. And I think there's a lot that people are hoping and looking from this court. And I'm wondering what you have to say about this court, Josephine. And do you think that this GBV court is an answer to women's long wait for access to justice, given that we have women who are also in prison now and they cannot even get legal representation, and we have children who are also in prison with their mothers, and this court probably could be an answer. And then also we need to look broader at the issues of conflict-related violence against women. Do you think that this court is likely going to provide justice to the women who are probably raped during conflict or who are sexually abused during conflict?
Thank you, Jacqueline. I think the establishment and the operationalization of this court has been long overdue. And I'm thinking that if this court was meant to support more of men, it would have kicked off. So still going back to this issue of the bias on women in South Sudan, where customary justice is more preferred to sort out women issues, and then statutory court is meant for men and men in power. So I feel the launch of this SGBV court, which I'm still calling SGBV, is an eye-opener. We need to make use of the court, but maybe more to the communities who are not aware that this court exists specifically to handle cases of SGBV is to do awareness in radios, awareness in communities, to ensure that the GBV court, which now they want to call it, is fully utilized. I was previously actually thinking that the name of that court was SGBV court, but after the launch and reading from the news, I saw it was reading GBV court. There's also advocacy or some publication or writings for us to do in terms of the way the name has been given. Yeah, and then I think this court should also be more cognizant of handling cases that are contentious in chambers and not in open court, because this is one of the survivor-centered protocols that the GBV actors want to ensure that GBV cases are handled in confidential and not in public, so as to embarrass the survivors and then inflict more stigma on them. I think that is what I can add.
Thank you very much, Josephine. I think I'll go back to Christina. You talked about the anti-GBV bill. Do you want to take us probably through some of the key areas of this bill? What are they addressing in regards to GBV and in regards to access to justice to women and children?
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, the bill is a product of Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Welfare, and they collaborated with Ministry of Justice and Judiciary and other stakeholders. They were consulted, and also there is this UNFPA, and then other documents such as CEDAW and then Maputo Protocol. They were all reviewed and meetings were held, and then the document was drafted. So the document mostly it covers that issues that violence women face mostly in the societies, and it gives us ways of how to apply, like how to seek justice, because we find that the society normally documents alone cannot assist to find justice, to access justice. There must be the element of environment that covers needs of women, and then accessibility and affordability. Women must have access to justice, and that one should be through easy access. Like the document also, it mentioned like they're going to establish a committee that are going to be responsible for these issues, and they're also going to establish a unit within the police, and then there is centers in the hospitals, and it's like they must attend to victims of GBV in 24 hours. And the issue of affordability, if the victim comes to the center and then the police find the victim, the police may assist, and it will be free of charge. And also it went further and it talked about other forms of violence that women face. And most importantly, I picked the burning ones, the issue of polygamy, and then the issue of return of dowry. I think these are the most important elements, because in our courts, we find that if a woman asks for divorce, she will have to return the dowry of the men. So, and in most cases, maybe she's facing a lot of difficulties and she cannot fight for herself. And the document also gave her that rights. And then the document also informed us that like the dowry should not exceed 30 cows. So I think, I believe people may fight for it, but the male dominant society, like the one we are in, I'm sure they will fight for that. They will say this is little, comparing the 100 cows and so on to these 30 cows. No. I believe they will fight us so much. And the issue of polygamy, the document mentioned that if you want to marry a second wife, you have to implement the Sharia laws. Like the Sharia laws, if you are marrying, you have to marry 4 wives and then you treat them equally. So in this document, it also gave us like ways of applying on that to court. You apply to court that you want to marry a second wife, and then with the consent of your first wife, and the court may summon the first wife, and she will inform the court whether she knew that the husband is going to marry or not. And again, also, if he has 3 wives or 4 wives, he has to show to court details or evidence of his properties, and the court have to divide it among the wives, and it will be written with their names. And then the issue of inheritance of the widow. The document also prohibited that unless with the consent of the widow. If she accepts so, well and good. If she doesn't accept it, the court also prohibited that. And apart from other things, like for girl child, it also prohibited FGM, and then prohibited early marriages, and then prohibited like compensation of a child, and all these things. So I think they are trying to implement this Sharia law a little bit, and if the person like gave affidavit to a court, and then like he was not truthful to the court, there are also charges that can be applied on the person. And coming back to the issue of victims of GBV, if they can apply for protection order. I heard something like this from Ms. Kiden. They have to apply for protection order against the other person, even if the person is your relative. And the document also protected women from their relatives. So they're going to establish homes, safe homes for them to stay there. And then for children, they will provide them with education and rehabilitation, and then counseling and all these things. And again, the document also mentioned that they're going to mention some of these things in the syllabus of the schools, and they want to teach children about human rights and gender equality. I think this is very important, and we just want to push for the document to go forward, to be enacted, and then later on we see what will happen with the regulation, and then to empower women themselves, to encourage them to participate effectively. And because like the number of female lawyers, we are few, we are not enough, and not all of us are able to participate in most of the discussions, and we are still dragged down with the fear and the self-confidence. So I think there's a lot to be done. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for that elaborate discussion. And I'm going to speak with my little Arabic because this is going to be a question for the grassroots. واحد من حاجة بيتكلم قال السexual and gender based violence ده كتير تو بيحصل في محلات في بلد ولا في قرية، ما بيحصل في المدينة كتير. وأنا شفت قال ممكن في توريت ولا في البيام في بوماس في محلات براو براو لأننا فيه ده محل السexual violence بيكون كتير فيه. نسوان ما متعلمين دي لمون بيتاب كتير في كلام sexual violence في بلد. وزي جبال كدين كلم نسوان تانين من باين وقال كانوا منشيلوا راجل تومون كان سجنوا مثلا منو يا بيجي بلومون اكل في ترابيزه سن راجل يا بودي مصاريف سبا وراجل عنده حق بدوغومون ولسه بيجيب اكل ومون باكل وفي ديمون باين وقال كانوا من يستكي راجل ده في بوليس وسيلو في سجن وفي محكمه وحاكمه بيت ما بيكون يعني فرحان بيكون ما في اكل في بيت ولا ما في زول بيجيب لهم اكل في الترابيزه وحاجات زي دي بيشجعوا فوضى كتير في sexual violence عن نسوان مثلا ما في جوا مدينه وكتير تحاجات دي بيحصل هناك زي first marriage البنات بيرسلوا في جوازة بدر لقوا لسه ما وصلوا عمر 18 ويتا بيلقوا قال كمان بنات باسروا كان سالة 18 أسرتك باسرتها قال لازم أنت جوز زول ده عنده أفكار وزول ده عنده قروش وكده. وأنا بشوف كمان قال مشكلة مالي ولا الدوري دي ذاته بيجا كمان واحد من حاجة اللي بيشجعوا violence against women. وأنا بجلت جوزيفين قال مثلا سنيا بعملوا عشان كيف أنا بقدر reduce ولا minimize gender based violence في grassroots level. الحاجات دي كتير تو بيحصل. Josephine, are you with us? How can we reduce GBV at the grassroots level, given that majority of the women at the grassroots are the ones who suffer really from sexual violence? And as Kiden said, they are the ones also who plead for their husbands or from the perpetrators to be released from either prison or even withdrawing the case from taking place because they fear like if this person is charged and in prison, they cannot get food on the table. And hence they have to allow and just let the case be dropped. And yet we have seen that majority of the cases are happening at the grassroots. So what do we need to do to minimize GBV at the grassroots?
Thank you, Jacqueline. The first thing we need to do is to report any violence against women and girls. And all the survivors who report the case, when you report, it's not only legal service that you get other services like health, like psychosocial support or counseling, and then you also get sometimes livelihood support from those that you report to if they are NGOs. So it is very, very important to report instead of dying in silence. Because sometimes when you report and you are cancelled, you will know how to manage when you go back. But if you are just remaining there at home without reporting and without telling somebody, then you'll be dying in silence alone. And then for me, as a legal person, I believe in accountability. Accountability for survivors. In case the survivor comes and seeks for legal action, we need to support that survivor to pursue the case with the legal representation. And for steward women, we do that free of charge because it is our mandate. But like someone mentioned here, that many of these cases are getting withdrawn. Women are withdrawing the cases, but I believe this is because of the immense pressure that they are receiving from their families and also from the families of their husbands. So this makes accountability for survivors very, very weak if the cases are withdrawn, even after signing the consent form. So this is also one of the things. And as CSOs, we need to look forward to reducing impunity in South Sudan. The threats, some of us will be living here when we are receiving threats, but how are we going to reduce these threats when we are talking about violence, a reduction of violence against women? So we need also to engage with the authorities who can support us in reducing this impunity in South Sudan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josephine. Josephine Bigulgal, anna ze nuswan wala nasal bishtakal fi hajata GBV de lazima nita iwonus ma taskut sakit asan kan taskut sakit te kaman ge encourage gal hajata algamu luba talle nuswan de kidam shigidam wanas victims zato ma mumkin gal asan rajil legi jibleta akil fi bet wasuno ind hak bidu gita wala indo hak be control gisim taki wo their sex at any time alo ya there. So you still eat his food, lakin kaman gal kano kaman gam haja batal, you don't need to keep quiet. Matters could sakit. Lazman ita biwonu sufiwa san ita biligo kaman musaadat mumkin fi tijata ta trauma healing wala mumkin fi tijata ta support al nas muhamin mumkin body letters and kef gediata kiyamshi gidam. So I would say that breaking the silence remains key important component in fighting GBV in our community, because if we keep quiet and then nobody's going to speak for us and fight for us. I'll come to Kiden Logo in regards to some of the ways. Probably you shared a lot of experience from the Jamaicans. What do you have to tell your sisters as some of the recommendations to ensure that justice is brought closer to the women and to ensure that women's rights are protected, and what needs to be done? Christine, as we wait for Kiden to join in, do you want to add something on what we have just said?
Okay, thank you so much. أنا بس كنت أقدر أقول في الموضوع بتاع people of the grassroots. القانون ده برضو أدى حق لناس في الجراس عشان يجوا like they look for their rights، يفتشوا حقوق بتاعهم. والقانون ده برضو في كوميتي، اللجنة اللي اتكونت بموجب القانون ده هيقوم يراقبوا الشيوخ like the chiefs and then the traditional leaders. القانون ده هيراقبهم، القانون هيشوف هم هيعملوا شنو في حقوق بتاع المرأة. لانه القانون بموجب القانون احنا بنعرف بانه الرجال في بيوتهم هم ياهو مرات بيكون شنو البابيتريترز، يعني هم بيكونوا ياهو المرتكبين الجريمه. عشان كده القانون بيحمي النساوين. انت لما تجي بمشكلتك وبتشتكي راجلك، القانون بيشيل الكوميتي بيشيلك، والكوميتي بيخدك في البيت الامن، في المحل الامن، عشان راجلك ده ما يجي يعمل لك حاجه. وبعدين القانون عنده ماليه، هم كونوا بيلقوا قروش من اتجاه معين، بيلقوا دعم من ناس برا، من ناس داخلي، وفي برنامج جاهز بتاع القروش عملوه تحت وزاره ماليه. فالزول ما يشيل هم بانه انا هسي لو ما اشتكيت راجلي، لو اشتكيت راجلي دخلوه في السجن، انا حقعد كيف مع عيالي. القانون ده بيدي حق انت تمشي تشكل في حقوق بتاعك، وتمشي تقعد في بيتنا، في بيت في السيف هوم ده، لغايه لدرجه لانه انت لغايه ما قدر ما انت داير حسب احتياجات بتاعك. والزول اللي بيكون عنده جنى، القانون برضو بيحمي الجنى ده، بيقدم لك احتياجات بتاع الجنى، وبيقدم لك احتياجاتك انت كأم. عشان كده الناس ما تخافوا. حتى الشيخ كان برضه ما اداك حقك، انت ممكن تمشي قدام. يعني الحاجه اللي اقدر اقول لنساوينا، ناسنا قاعدين يخافوا شديد، احنا يا جماعه ما نخاف. انت تمشي تفتش حقك. انت كان ما في زول داير يديك، كان انت قاعد تشوف ولا قاعد تخاف، امشي فتش محامي، امشي لمحاميه. انا بشوف بناتنا كتار بخاف يمشي للرجال، امشي لمحاميه البيت، فتش محلهم. حسي زي انا في محلات كتير انا قاعد انكرج وقاعد اشجع النساويين يجوا يقدموا مشاكلهم، بيجوا بيضربوا لي تليفون، يا مولانا في حاجه كده كده انت ممكن تساعدينا. انا قاعد اقول لهم تعالوا بيجوني. and then we have this group of women advocates. عندنا جروب بتاعت محاميات، نساء المحاميات، احنا شغالين في شغل ده. انت كان عندك مشكله ان شاء الله ما راجلك منو في بيت اي زول، قانون برضو بيحميك من زول ده وبيخدك في محل امن. عشان كده ما تخافوا يا جماعه، الناس لازم يشجعوا. شكرا. thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Probably you can elaborate a lot on the women's advocates. Are they also having like outreach in the States, or they're in Juba? And how can women get you? Probably just to give like which location are you in for those who do not know, so they can know.
Okay, women advocates are located here in Juba, and they participate a lot in like women rights issues. And they have just established the office, and it's located here in Juba. I don't know specifically which area, but they can reach me. Whoever wants to contact me, and I will connect them with women advocates. And at the moment, they work on a lot of issues, women issues, in collaboration with Ministry of Justice. Actually, there is Department of Women and Juvenile in the Ministry of Justice. It was not active, but recently they have started to receive cases. And the problem that they were facing is that women don't report their cases. And but recently they are working on that. And the challenges that they face is that there's only one prosecutor who works on that issue. And you can imagine how many cases we have of gender-based violence in South Sudan, leave alone Juba, and then South Sudan as a whole. So in the law says if you don't have like legal representative, the government will give you one. So these women advocates, they do that. They do that, and they receive funds on tackling such issues. So they are there, and whoever wants to link with them, let them contact me direct, and then I will link them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. I think listeners, you can reach out to women advocates through Christine Peter. And also, I believe Steward Women is providing legal aid, and FIDA South Sudan is also doing some legal aid. So we have women lawyers who are providing these services, and you should not die in your home alone. Josephine, Christine mentioned about women not reporting their cases. They don't report their cases for follow-up. What are some of the factors that is making women not to report their cases? Yani mara masalan fi bet mumkin she's abused or she's beaten, or sometimes even women, when they are raped by men in uniform, they fear to report these cases. Yani le masalan muswan made report mashakilat zede gidam le police wala le muhamina san kef bijibu gedia tomon gedam makama. Josephine?
Yeah, I think one of the things was already mentioned by Kiden, that that was when they are withdrawing cases, but also it acts the same. Women are not reporting cases because sometimes the perpetrators are their husbands or family members, and these are people they rely on at the end of the day for their welfare and for their livelihoods. So they end up not biting the fingers that feed them. And then, secondly, women are not also reporting because they do not want their family name spoiled. They want to be called good women, as society has labeled them. You cannot take your husband outside there and bring a case against him. That means you are technically you are dissolving the relationship or the marriage, and the children will suffer. And so because women do not want their children to suffer, then they end up remaining in those abusive relationships or marriages. Then the other is why they are not reporting is some of them have never seen a good result out of the reports that they have brought. Because there is these things in South Sudan where they say Tali Bukra, Tali Bukra. When you're trying to follow up your case, they are just telling you Tali Bukra. And then you lose interest in following up the case. And then when other community members also see that so and so was following up her case and nothing happened to her, then they also lose interest in reporting. Then the other thing is the issue of impunity. Maybe you are raped by a soldier, and then what is the guarantee that when you report the issue, you will not be killed before your time? So there is also that fear from the perpetrator, but also fear from the community, which also increases secondary victimization of survivors. So those are some of the things I can mention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josephine. I think also one of the things, if I can add, is that our customary laws are very, very strong, especially in how women can report some of these issues. For example, if a woman is raped outside of marriage, she cannot report that she was raped because the man can be seen like he is weak, and probably that calls for a revenge. And the man will also not want to hear like my wife was raped or sexually abused, especially when it is outside of marriage. So they would rather keep the thing secret and maintain their family. And then the other one is that some women also fear to speak out that they are raped or they are sexually abused because of stigma. And we have seen many survivors who are suffering from stigma, and they cannot report because society will laugh at them. And we have seen instances where when they report to the police, the first thing is like, why did you go even outside of your home? You know, things are not right. What time did you go out? Or sometimes they start looking at what were you wearing if you are a girl. So such kind of thing stigmatizes the survivors or the victim, and it makes them not to report some of these cases. The other one is the distance. As you know, like most of these things happen outside of the town, as I said initially. So someone who is probably abused 10 kilometers out of Juba will not even have the transport to bring them to the town or to the hospital to report. And sometimes by the time they arrive, the evidence is already lost. And we have seen cases where the courts are throwing out because they don't have medical evidence, or sometimes the evidence is not sufficient. And hence women feel like even if they report, they don't get redress and they don't get justice. So they would rather keep quiet and just forget of what is happening to them. So these are some of the things that I think that they are affecting the way women can access justice in this country. So with this, we come back to you, Kiden Logo. If you can go back to the questions we asked, like what do we need to do? What should be the way forward, learning from your experience?
Okay, Jackie, thank you. I would like to acknowledge the information that was shared by my fellow panelists, that is Christine and really. Yes. So what I would like to say is that in the justice and protection of women. We need
Kiden, can you speak louder a bit?
aspects of the law. You're hearing? I'm saying
Can
we
you
need to move from punitive aspect for the court and their sentence and they're going to, and their sentence. We need to look at the rehabilitative and the restorative systems within our justice system. Because going back to South Sudan, we realized that we were just coming out of conflict. We have many persons who may be deep trauma. We may even have cases of mental illnesses and all that. So it is really important for the legal fraternity to look at how these persons can be rehabilitated and restored so that they can become functional members of society. And then if we could also go back and make use of the non-custodial sentences. Yes, somebody has committed an offense and need to be punished, but it
Kiden, we
does
can't
not
see your face.
necessarily
Can
mean
you
that to
adjust
be
the
put in
camera?
prison. If we make use of the non-custodial sentences, then we can have access to rehabilitative programs that can empower them, give them some income generating skills so that they can go back and rebuild themselves as functional members of society. Then one thing that I also would like to point out is that for the women who are already in prison, I don't know. I'm not well conversant with the prison system in South Sudan, but it's vital that they just don't sit and serve their sentences. If we could come up with some programs like capacity building, skills training, so that when they finish their sentences, they have something to fall back to. We have instances here in Jamaica where women have been put in prison and they come out, some of them even come up with the six, like the high school certificate that they were able to do in prison, because life does not stop. Eventually they're going to come out. Then that I also point out, Jacqueline, is that when these persons are before the court, here in Jamaica we have what we call the social inquiry report. Somebody, whether it is a RM court or at the high court, they usually ask for what is called the social inquiry report. And this one, the judge actually wants to know more about the person. So we bring forth the social economic aspect of the offender. And
Hi,
sometimes we
Kiden.
realize that when this report comes forth, you realize that there are so
Hello.
many issues that may have led to this person committing these offenses. And this report usually will act as a mitigating factor that will assist the offender, the female offenders, from getting a fairer sentence based on their circumstances.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Kiden. And can you adjust your camera to your face? We are missing that beautiful face. We cannot see it well.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, we can see your face now.
You
I
hearing
think
me?
we can hear you. People could not see that beautiful smile. So keep the camera focused on your face.
I am
um,
hearing. Hello?
okay, we can hear you now. Yeah, Christine, in terms of the recommendations, I think Kiden has given us some more practical recommendations, which included some kind of um, training. Like, you are not in prison, just because you need to be punished, but you are there so that you can be rehabilitated. And when you get out, you are a different person. And she talked about kind of capacity building or programs that will empower female inmates. And I think that is also one of the key things that we can be advocating for. And I'll be happy to hear also some more practical recommendations on how we can ensure like justice is brought closer to the people, and also women who are, I could say like women in conflict with the law are able to get fair judgment and access justice at equal basis with men.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacqueline. Yeah, I support Kiden because there was a time I also conducted a project in the prison, Juba Central Prison, and I discovered that those women, they are just there, they do nothing. What they do is that they cook for the male inmates, and they have a lot of difficulties, health, and then some of them, like the facilities, they stay with their children. The children don't have a special care, and the recommendation of my project was that we have to establish the regulation. If we have the regulation for the Prison Act, these things will be eradicated. And one of my recommendation was that they have to be programs within the prison. Like in other neighboring countries, you will find that there is this group of women in the prison, and they produce cakes, and they make like gufa, and بيعملوا حاجات بيخيطوا ملابس وحاجات زي ديل. Like what Kiden said, at the end of the day, they are not going to stay there forever. Like they have to be trained how to be reintegrated in the society. So I want to say that as my recommendation is that the Ministry of Justice should look into these things, like in the Department of Women and Juvenile. They have to come up with a lot of work, and they have to like appoint a lot of female prosecutors within that department, because I believe if I'm a victim and I go to an office and I find all of them are male, I will not be comfortable to share my problem with them. And that happened that during the crisis, some victims of the GBV, they came to the ministry and they found that they are all male prosecutors. And the victim was like, I cannot tell my story to them. I need a female prosecutor. So I urge the Minister of Justice to appoint more female prosecutors in the department, and also the document gave rights to the ministry, and then judiciary and Ministry of Justice, civil society organization, UN institutions. Like they will have to establish a committee. So through that committee, I believe if they establish a unit that deals with these issues in collaboration with Human Rights Commission and Ministry of Justice, because we have also that Department of Human Rights and Legal Aid within the Ministry of Justice. And if they collaborated together, I believe that change will happen, and gradually people will move from these harmful culture practices, and the public will view cases of GBV like any other case, normal cases. There will not be element of, oh, ita ya binia batal, you show yourself badly, ita leza turafi mahalda kida ya nasgi blame ita. So in most cases, you will find that people blame the female more than the male. And I also believe that if a unit established that takes care of these things, change will happen, and we'll enjoy our rights. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. That is brilliant. You know, networking of the justice actors and the rule of law institutions become crucial in the way that justice is connected. Because if one justice institution is not responding, and then we cannot be able to jumpstart and think of justice for women and girls. And I think review of the Prison Act and the prison regulation becomes important, and probably we need to keep an eye to ensure that these laws are gender sensitive and responsive to the needs of female inmates, and even the female warders who are working with women in the prison. Josephine, as a human rights activist and based on your experiences, what recommendations can you give, particularly on how we can tackle justice issues from the grassroots to the national level? what role can citizens play in that?
Okay, Jacqueline, I also, before I go to that role, I wanted to add on the issue of the non-custodial sentences and also the prison. Myself, I'm not in for the non-custodial sentences for South Sudan at this point in time because there's too much compromises that are made. We don't have enough prison staff to look after these prisoners who are doing community service. I had a case of where a young man was sentenced to 7 years for raping an old woman in her garden. This woman was harvesting her nuts and, putting on this tanura. Inside there's nothing. So as she bent to pull the nuts, the young man just entered her from behind. And they rotated in the garden. And when the matter came to court, he was sentenced to 7 years. And then the court, unfortunately, gave him community service. The second day of the community service, he disappeared. And so the old man lives in fear. The old woman now lives in fear. So for South Sudan, non-custodial sentences at this time for me is risky. Then when it comes to the issue of the inmates in Juba prison, I'll be talking from an experience point of view. I was an inmate there myself with my child. So all we could just do is wake up in the morning. For me, because I had a baby, my role was just to wake up, take tea, and just sit and take care of my child, while the other inmates would go and cook for the male inmates, like what Christina said. So I think introduction of capacity building and also livelihood project for the women is important because the cooking is done in turns. It's not every day. So there's a roster where the women go and cook today, others rest. So for those who are resting on that day, they should be engaged. But I feel that they should be asked with the type of livelihood that they could do in prison. And also we should ascertain whether this livelihood will not be harmful to some of the colleagues. For example, if we say knitting of bed sheet, are we not sure if a quarrel ensues, they are not going to use the needles to harm their friends? So it's something that we should critically think about, that the support that we give them will not harm the rest of the colleagues or the inmates if a quarrel ensues. So to go to your question about the role of the public in ensuring access to justice for women and girls, it is not just us to ensure that crime is reduced in the community. It is the role of everybody with their different capacities to ensure that crime is reduced in community. And these roles we can place, we can do them in different ways, by being our brothers' keepers, by doing community service, community policing, by ensuring that you report whatever you see as suspicious to any authority, and it is the authorities to follow up. So as CSOs, our role is to raise awareness to the communities or to the public and ensure that the public take charge of being their brother's keeper, so that we achieve that one goal of reducing crime in the community or in our society of South Sudan. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josephine. I think that's the idea of us also learning from other regions and sharing of different experiences. And I think for South Sudan, Josephine, bigul gal masalan haja algal bisijinita lakini tabura fi bet wa itabura kala hukum taki fi bet dima bagdir ishtaka lini wahid minum gal an jadi rujal kan sibumu rafi hila mumkin ma fi zol bai numon kanumon say gaidin quiz wala batal عندنا كمان صوف كتير القال witness ولا زول بيجيبوا سوكوا توغي دام ده is not protected. So sometimes you will have a violent perpetrator or accused, and then can sibo min siji no bijawara mungkin bija au gita wala bijamolo haja tani later. So haja dafa wala revenge de ketir lanna fi junub hina wa kananna sibo gal mumkin nas delal kanamolo masalan rep usulude khaliki de jafi wara fi la community umon zatu bramul aktar min de indana rijal al kalazum biga serial rapist del kan sibu jafi jua muktamar wallahi ma sexual violence and hasil hina mon bizatu bikarabu bini al sakair mumkin umur 3 سنة wala 4 سنة dil bikun ketir. So the kelimugal marat mental issues kaman be affect rijal. So rajil kan kalas bada amul raping wala iyal wala jiran wala sunu kan khalifi muktamar tanna de ma beside anna ketir. So Josephine bikelimgal nas de lazman kidomon geni fil mahakama. So anna kalas gija fil akhir ta barnamij tanna ana bikelim gal mumkin gubal anna bigofulu anna basado ana panelist anna debes min 1 minute ودي anna yan akhir risala tomo le nasal basma fil program de wa mumkin monder gul sunule naze. So we will start with Kiden. If you can just say in 1 minute, like, what is your message to the South Sudanese people and women, particularly in the fight against injustice to women and girls and fighting SGBV?
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and also to fellow panelists, Jean and Jacqueline. It was really an interactive discussion. I have learned so much. What I would like to say to our audience, women in South Sudan and women around the world, we should not be ashamed to go to court. When you have been violated, it is not your fault. And sitting at home with the problem, sweeping things under the carpet is not going to help. You're just going to get more traumatized, and eventually it is going to surface. It is important to come out. It might be traumatic, you might be stigmatized, but this is part of the process that will eventually heal you. You need to come out and report and follow your matters and see to it that justice is served. Sometimes it may not help you, but sometimes what you do is going to be strength, is going to be courage to the other person. We are where we are as women, as human beings, because the person to do something, ashamed, they were belittled, but they were able to stand up to something that is right. So don't get embarrassed because you have been raped. It is not your fault. In truth, if you sit down and don't report, maybe that's when you will actually be an accomplice. You need to come out and have your story heard. It might help you, it might help your daughter, it might help somebody else one day to stand for their own rights. I want to thank the forum. It has been a very learning experience for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kiden. Let's hear from Christine Peter. What do you have to say to the listeners, and what's your final word to the South Sudanese women?
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank Women Intellectual Forum for inviting us for this wonderful discussion. Indeed, we have learned a lot from, I personally have learned a lot from Josephine and from Kiden, the experience they have in Jamaica, And then I believe that we are going to learn from them and take this experience and implement some of them in South Sudan. And I want to say she also mentioned about protection order, and this protection order it also helps the victim, protects the victim against the revenge, and the victim can renew this protection order every 3 months. And what I want to say is that to our listeners, please help someone else. If you see people are fighting or someone being abused, you can help in reporting the case, not leaving that person alone. Sometimes people in the family will find that they are facing these challenges from the close relatives. So a neighbor can help. We have in South Sudan, people go, even if there's an accident, people go and watch how the person is dying. But I want to encourage the listeners that if you see something happening with your neighbor, please go and take a look and help them to seek justice. Because with this, we will help one another and the information will reach out there. And if we keep leaving it like that, it will be accumulated. And at the end of the day, we will find that we will not be able to help them because the cases will be much. So I want to encourage every listener to go and give this information to others. And with this, we'll know that we have rights and we'll enjoy our rights. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for these closing remarks. Josephine, do you want to wind up with the summary and what you have to say to the public and to South Sudanese?
Thank you, Jacqueline. As I close, I would like to say that GBV does not only happen to women, it also happens to men. And maybe it could have been happening to men in greater magnitude, but because they want to keep their ego, they want to keep their heads up, so they are one of those who die silently. And that's why you see, even when it comes to suicide, the cases of suicide are high in men and the traumas are high in men. And also, we could also attribute that the high incidences of GBV against women are because men are more traumatized and they are not reporting these things. So they end up inflicting their trauma or the pain that they are going through on women just to get relieved. Something to say about GBV on men is last week we had in the news that 11 cases of rape were reported against men. And this one just came, boom. It came once. We don't know how the next one will come. So we are so happy that men are beginning to come out. This is not about it's not about being keeping your manhood. It is about bringing out the issue that is affecting you so that you will seek help, because if you do not seek help, you will end up killing yourself alone. So my caution to you out there is, men, please report as much as the women are reporting. As for steward women, even if we are not helping men directly, but we will be able to give you some guidance of some resourceful persons who can support you in what you are going through. So that is my word going out to men who are suffering from GBV. As I close this session on my part, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the South Sudanese women intellectuals for inviting me to this 34th panel discussion on women's access to justice and protection in South Sudan. In my closing intervention, I'm encouraging reporting of SGBV cases, and in particular intimate partner violence, where you live with the perpetrator, see his face every day. If the perpetrator doesn't kill you, if the man doesn't kill you himself, you are the one going to end up killing him. And this is also something that we should take note of, because this anger just comes, it comes out like with a very high passion by the time you realize you have hurt your colleagues. So we need to begin to report at early signs of GBV that we see. And then conclusively, I ask those of us who are partners to improve documentation. We need to document and investigate SGBV cases. This is very critical because as we talk, today I was asked to give the number of cases that have been documented. We can't even at the top of our heads talk about the number of cases that have been documented because there is no one system that we are using to document. So it's for us to take home the issue of proper documentation and investigation of SGBV cases for the success of any future criminal prosecutions, and also to better work with our upcoming transitional justice mechanisms at the national and international level. All this will be facilitated by proper documentation. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you very much, this great panel, and thank you for the listeners. I think this is one of the greatest panelists that are really touching issues that are close to the heart of women and close to the lives of women. I think access to justice remain one fundamental right for women and girls in this country, and it calls for collective action where all of us need to respond and to wake up and to start speaking about issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Breaking the silence remain key in this fight, and we encourage that both men and women join the fight. Men should speak against violence against women because the fight cannot be done by the women only. It requires the men. And always, I keep saying, like, let us educate the men also about what is bad in regards to gender-based violence against women and girls, and they should not be the perpetrators, but they should be the defenders of these rights. I will also want to say that as women activists and South Sudanese Women Intellectual Forum, we should be working together towards filling the dots of the justice, such that we are able to connect with all the stakeholders and institutions that are providing justice to ensure that effective and efficient ways are devised to address the challenges that we discussed today in this forum. Economic empowerment of women remain key because if women cannot be able to stand strong economically, and then they are going to be remaining under abuse, and we can not say like we can reduce violence against women without having economically empowered women. And this call for action for us to be able to lobby for funding that could economically empower women, including those at the grassroots level. The issues of customary law still remain a challenge in our fight for justice, and I think this requires a lot of awareness raising, including even at the national level, where we need to review the laws to ensure like they are gender responsive and they are drawn from a rights angle, where women's rights are guaranteed in those legislations and they are protected. And finally, I would like to say that we remain extremely happy with the Women Intellectual Forum because this is where South Sudanese women get the opportunity to discuss critical issues of the nation, not necessarily issues that face women, but what role can women contribute in nation building and in shaping South Sudan. So we thank you very much, the hosts, also UN Women, who is able to host us, like as women activists, we have challenges. We cannot be able to get stronger internet. We cannot be able to get safe venue where we can talk about issues of sexual violence and particularly violence against women and girls. So UN Women, we remain indebted for you for hosting us, and we look forward for more of these kinds of collaboration and efforts that will make South Sudan safe for women, girls, and everybody else. So thank you very much, the panelists. I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all the best of the Christmas in advance, and also the best as we continue to celebrate the International Human Rights Day and also the 16 days of activism. I feel this is empowering in our activism work, and the work should go on. Thank you very much.